Hi, I'm Margie, and I've been asked to speak on the subject of Jesus' words to Mary on the cross. Jesus said, "Woman, behold thy son. Son, behold thy mother." A mother never forgets her children. Because of this, she can feel deep grief, great pride, or gnawing fear for her children and her grandchildren, depending on what's going on in her life or the world around them. Jesus' life gave her opportunity to go through all of those things. Mary did not have a normal mother-son relationship because she did not have a regular brand human son. You just have to look at how he got his start in life. His birth was announced by an angel. She was probably a young teenager. That's when they married. And she wouldn't have had a clue what an angel was. And yet, she continued. Mary was betrothed to Joseph at the time, but chosen by God to birth his son into humanity. She was almost put away. There has been discussion as to whether that meant sending her into confinement or having her stoned to death for adultery. But she said yes. She had no idea what lay ahead, but she trusted the angel and she trusted God. Then she had to take a first century taxi, a donkey, all the way to Bethlehem to be counted in a census. That's a rough ride. She went into labor upon arrival in town, and of course it was overflowing with travelers and there was nowhere to stay, no room whatsoever. So she had to give birth in a space meant for animals. We don't know who helped her. Might have been just Joseph. He might have been able to find somebody else. But we do know that she didn't get any postpartum rest because the shepherds showed up. A whole bunch of men, we don't know how many, who were dirty and sweaty, had been out in the fields, but they'd been sent by God, and she trusted. She also had to share her whole experience, a new mom experience, with some very wealthy astrologers who came from the East, and they had followed a star to where the baby was. She trusted them. She trusted them enough to leave with her husband and flee to Egypt because Herod was seeking this young new king. When Jesus was entering his teens, he went with his family to Jerusalem for the Passover. And there was a big crowd, and on the way back, they just assumed that Jesus was with them and found out he wasn't. And they retraced their steps to see where he was, obviously, probably their hearts in their throats, and they found him in the temple. And what was he doing in the temple at 12 years old? He was talking to the big shots, the people that knew everything theologically, and they were impressed with him, and so they should have been. But I can imagine Mary's frustration when she said, "Where have you been?" There was surely anxiety and anger and fear and everything else and loaded into that question. And he said, "Well, surely you knew. This is my Father's house. This is where I'll be." He was deliberately reminding his mother of his larger purpose. There were probably other instances, but one we read about was during his adult life as an itinerant teacher. He was teaching somewhere, and his mom and his brothers showed up, and somebody came to him and said, "Your mom and brothers are outside." And he said, "Who's my mother? Who are my brothers?" And he pointed to his disciples and said, "Here are my brothers and my mother." And then he went on to say, "Those who do the will of my Father in heaven, those are my mother and my brothers and my sister." He wasn't saying they didn't do the will of the Father. Mary had gone above and beyond. But he was preparing them for a new kingdom, a new family. It was imperative to prepare them. At this time, we have to remember his brothers were not yet believers. They became believers and church leaders after his resurrection, And his brother James was like the Bishop of Jerusalem, and both he and Jude wrote letters that are included in the New Testament. But now with the cross was the end of his human ministry pre-resurrection. Because yes, he did return in a resurrected body, but I sort of think of that as a superhuman, not who he was before. He had conquered death, and now he was tasked with the empowerment of his disciples to build a church. Hanging on that cross, held there by love. To those who watched, it was Jesus of Nazareth dying. It was Mary's son, the carpenter's son, rabbi. It was the suffering teacher who was carefully choosing his words from the fog of agony. He knew at the end his spirit was in his heavenly Father's hands and home. Every word he said required pushing against those nails and pushing against his diaphragm where his body was weighing on it in order to say each of his words. Each word was precious. It was like gold. And these were among his most precious. Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother. The first person he saw when he entered the world was Mary. One of the last he spoke to was Mary. And he charged one of his most trusted companions to be her son, to take care of her. And she was being charged to take care of that disciple who would need it. Woman, behold thy son. I have never known a parent to stop mourning a lost child, even decades later. Mary would also mourn Jesus, but she would also embrace her new family and her new son, John.